Hello, YouTube. Welcome back to another book review from me, your host, Logan Albright, and I hope you're all having a merry holiday season. Today, I want to talk about the book We by Yevgeny Zamyatin, a Soviet author who wrote one of the very first, what we would consider modern dystopian novels. And I was aware of this book from a long time ago. I studied Russian in college, and we talked about a lot of Russian literature, and this book came up, and I kind of knew what it was and vaguely what it was about, but I had never read it. And if you're a follower of my channel, you will know that I have become obsessed with this edition of Penguin Science Fiction Classics. It's a British edition. They're not available in the United States. And every time I go to Britain, I try to pick up as many of them as I can because they are expertly curated. And I like the design of them. I like the minimalist cover art. I like the blue and white thing. And every book I've read in the series has been good to great. Some of them have been like amazingly good. And so I always try to pick them up and I've the ones I haven't read before and learn about a new science fiction novel. And so I wanted to read We because I like science fiction, I like dystopia, and I'd heard about it and I knew it was important. And so I thought I should check it out. And I did, and it was great. It was published in 1924 in America in English first. And then it was only later published in Russian because, of course, the Soviet government was suppressing it. And the author was not allowed to go back into Russia. And it was a very unpopular book for that reason. But it was incredibly influential. George Orwell is quoted as saying that he was inspired to write 1984 after reading this book. Aldous Huxley denies that he was influenced by this book for writing Brave New World, but there's a very similar concepts in there. And then, of course, Ayn Rand, who is also Russian, her book Anthem is very, very similar to this book. And I think she also denies being influenced by it, or it's not known whether she was influenced by it. But I have a hard time believing that she wasn't influenced by it because they're both Russian and the concepts are so similar. Let's get into some of those concepts of what are similar. The story revolves around this futuristic society. It's 1,000 years in the future. There's been some kind of cataclysm or a war that destroyed society, basically, and in order to rebuild the emergence of the one state. The government is called one state, everything is unified, and it's a totalitarian system. It's a system that is micromanaging every aspect of the citizens' lives. And so there's a timetable that tells you when you have to do everything. Things like drinking and smoking and emotional outbursts are outlawed. And then the most interesting one I haven't really seen before in other types of dystopian fiction is in order to get rid of jealousy, they have basically assigned everyone, they've ruled that everyone can have access to anyone else for sexual purposes that they want to. And so you just fill out a form with the bureaucracy and say, I want to have sex with this person this week, and you get to. And that's pretty dystopian and pretty awful. So I found that an interesting aspect of it. And the main character is named D503. He is, everyone is known by numbers. They're not known by names, which is something that also Ayn Rand does in Anthem. She names all her characters by numbers. And then the other similarity there is the use of the first person plural, the use of we instead of I. Ayn Rand leans into that very heavily in Anthem, and that's sort of the title of the book is We. So that makes sense. So anyway, the main character is writing this novel as an epistolary novel. They're journal entries, all the chapters. And they're about his experiences, and the reason he's writing it is because he is designing a spaceship for the government to go out and spread the government to other worlds and spread their beautiful ideas of freedom and democracy and all the wonderful things that they believe in, which are not really freedom and democracy, but, totalitarianism. And he's decided he's going to write this journal so that he can send it out into space with the spaceship, and other people from other civilizations will know how they live and why. And he's very critical of the past. He writes a lot about how in the previous ages of humanity, they did things all backwards. Everything was chaotic. It was ridiculous. You could just choose to do whatever you wanted whenever you wanted to do it. The government didn't give you a schedule telling you when you had to eat and sleep and work. And how did they manage in that society? That's ridiculous. And so he's very critical of freedom, and he's very bought into the one state mission, and he's building this spaceship. And what I find interesting is that in most dystopia novels, the protagonist becomes disillusioned with the dystopia and tries to rebel against it. He says, this is wrong. This is not the way we should live. We have to live a different way, and I'm going to fight against it. And this is not the case in this one. Our protagonist here has to be dragged kicking and screaming into the revolution, which I find very interesting. So he encounters this woman who's, a little bit repulsive to him at first, but also alluring because she's different, and he doesn't know what to make of her, and he's sort of fascinated by her. And she is a member of a revolutionary group that is trying to take down one state and restore freedom to the people. And she's basically trying to recruit him because he has access to this spaceship, and they need the spaceship in order to carry out their revolution. So it's kind of a recruitment thing, but she does it covertly. She doesn't tell him, I'm trying to recruit you. She seduces him and tries to bring him in that way. And so it's interesting that he is not a willing participant, and he's not very critical of the one state. He kind of thinks the one state is great and is bought into it. But he gradually kind of gets drawn over to the revolutionary side and ends up helping whether he wants to or not. And he starts dreaming, and dreaming is considered a mental illness in this society. You're not supposed to dream. You're not supposed to be imaginative. And they have operations that they perform to, basically they call it removing your soul. They say, your soul, you've developed a soul, which is like an illness, and we have to give you an operation to remove your soul so that you won't think these forbidden thoughts or have these dreams or have these emotions anymore. And they try to take all that away. So that's the basic story of We. And I really liked it. I think that it's kind of suffers from the Seinfeld is unfunny trope. If you're familiar with the Seinfeld is unfunny trope, it's the idea that something that has been heavily influential and heavily copied, if you go back and look at the original thing, it no longer seems very impressive or good because you've seen so many variations on it. You've seen so many things that have come after that have done it maybe better or maybe in a more interesting way or explored that territory, so it now seems cliche. And that is very easily... you can very easily see how that might be the case with We, because you've got Brave New World, you got Fahrenheit 451, you got Anthem, you got 1984, you got Animal Farm, you got The Hunger Games, you got a million different dystopia things that have basically been copying We all these years. But I still found it a very interesting book, and I found it very enjoyable because it's original, and it's the original person who came up with these ideas, and there are enough differences with these other stories to make it interesting. The epistolary nature I found interesting. The way it's written is very Russian, I think. Even though it's published in translation and published in English, you can tell that, like, if you've read Russian literature, there's a certain way that Russians write, and this really has a Russian flavor to it. So if you like Russian literature, you might enjoy it. A lot of ambiguity is left in the text. There's a lot of unspoken things that you kind of have to infer. The narrator will often trail off at the end of a sentence and not finish his thought. So you have to kind of figure out, piece together what he's been saying, what you think the message of it is. And that can be a little bit challenging, but it also makes the book interesting. And so I really thought We was great. And it's just very educational to see where these books came from and where this genre came from. This is sort of the foundational work of a whole genre that has become very popular. And it's written by an ex-communist, basically, who was disillusioned by the revolution. And I find a lot of good art comes from those type of people who are enthusiastic about something, and then it goes wrong. The Russian Revolution happens, and it doesn't go the way he is hoping it would go, and he then writes a reaction against it. And this is the only book, as far as I know, that Yevgeny Zamyatin wrote, but it's such a powerful and influential one. He is very concerned with artistic freedom, with the freedom of expression. And he saw, he wanted workers' rights, and he wanted, redistribution of wealth, and he wanted, all these things to help poor people, essentially, and get rid of the class system. But what he saw with the Russian Revolution was the suppression of artistic freedom and artistic expression. And that's what he was really reacting against. And so it's very good. It's a very good book, and I recommend you read it if you are all interested in dystopia books and the dystopia genre and where it came from and the roots of certain ideas that are now omnipresent in science fiction and even mainstream fiction. So there you go. That's what I have to say about We. I have a bunch more of these Penguin Sci-Fi Classic books that I have not read yet. I did a haul video on that, which a couple weeks ago, and you can see all the ones I got, but I'll be reviewing more of them in the weeks to come. I hope you will check back in, and I'd like to know your thoughts. Please leave a comment down below about your thoughts on We and the works of Zamyatin. The work of Zamyatin, I should say. And if you enjoyed this review, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications. And I will be back with you next week with another book review. I hope it's going to be a good one. I think it'll be an interesting one. And thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time.